Well, thank you everyone for being here in this, the Impact of Impact Roundtable. My name is 𝗤𝗏𝗂𝗃𝗂𝗂 and I'm the responsible for the Impact Research Project in CERCA. So I'm just going to say a brief introductory words. Well, thank you for, we've had quite a great response from this. So I'm just going to briefly go over the project in which sort of this event is under, so you understand the format that we have decided to have today and the topics that will be discussed. So as many of you in the room know very well, and some of you may or may not know, the CERCA institution, which gathers 42 research centers here in Catalonia, has been running a research impact assessment project since 2019 until 2024, so it was planned for 4 or 5 years. In 2019, there was a first pilot in which impact case studies, aka narratives, were assessed to test where the system was in terms of impact, its strengths and weaknesses. During these 4 years after that, well, there was a pandemic, as you may recall, and then after that, we ran a series of training sessions. We created communities of practice to essentially foster or increase impact literacy within the CERCA ecosystem. In this 2024, we are running a second pilot assessment of impact narratives in which we try to assess how the system has matured in terms of being able to demonstrate impact. We are in the final stages of this process, and this week we are having the panel meetings to assess and score the narratives. And as a result of this, we have a number of experts, international experts in impact in Barcelona. So we thought, okay, we can make the most of it by having an event like this to discuss impact. Then we thought, okay, let's make it a bit bi-directional, so there's not only 1, 2, 3 of them speaking to an audience, but have the chance for the audience to ask questions. And then we said, okay, let's invite not only CERCA centers, but let's disseminate it widely in Catalonia. And we're glad that we have a great response. So thanks again for being here. So the topics we wanted to cover is that although as a result of this learning process, we hope to have increased impact literacy and we have instilled confidence within the CERCA centers to tackle impact-related demands, we are well aware that this growing centrality of impact in all the research processes, poses questions, creates challenges, even creates some tensions in the community of researchers, research managers, and institutions. So we wanted to sort of have a conversation about this with a few international experts. I'm going to introduce them to you, so they're not exactly the same order, so I'll follow the order on the screen. First, we have 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, Director of Research Impact Canada and Vice President for Research Strategy and Impact at York University in Toronto, Canada, who's also the chair of the Research Impact Assessment Advisory Board of CERCA. We have Esther De Smet, Senior Research Policy Advisor at Ghent University in Belgium. We have 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 Pedersen, Professor of Science, Communication and Impact Studies at Aalborg University and Director of the Humanomics Research Center in Copenhagen, Denmark. And we have Paul Adam, Director of the Research Lab at the Agency for Health Quality and Assessment of Catalonia, AQUAS. So thanks to the 4 of you for being here. So how is this going to work? When you signed up for this, you were asked to provide questions, comments, topics that you would like to be discussed here. And we have essentially created 4 topic groups or 4 main issues, which are individual perspective on impact, institutional perspectives on impact, impact and basic research, and evaluation of impact. Okay, so we sort of grouped all the feedback we have into these 4 broad areas. For each of them, we will have one of our panelists sort of introducing the topic. Then the other 3 will have a chance to comment, to say a few words about them too. And then we will open the floor for questions from the audience for each topic. Okay, so we'll do it 4 times. Any of them could single-handedly fill up the 2 hours just talking about impact, but it's much more fun if you ask questions too, okay? So we do encourage you to ask questions, even controversial ones, so do not shy away from speaking if you want to. Okay, without further ado, because you're not here to listen to me, we will start with the first topic, which is individuals' perspective on impact, which our main panelist here will be 𝗲𝗏𝗏. Questions that we have sort of summarized under this topic. Why do we even have to justify what we do? No one asks teachers or doctors to convince society that what they do actually matters. Second, what type of support personnel is needed? What skills should an impact officer have? And third, how can impact officers convince reluctant researchers that impact is an investment, and how do they work together? So, Esther.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for all being here. I may be the odd one out. I'm just a senior policy advisor, so I'm the boots on the ground, trying to do the same thing that you as impact officer are trying to do for an entire university of 9,000 researchers. So if I look tired, that's why. So the first statement, I know it was supposed to be a bit controversial, this question, but I think we have to be honest. There isn't a profession in the world that isn't asked at one point in time to explain why they do what they do. Even us as policy advisors, we have an evaluation every 2 years. Maybe you don't, but I have. Every 2 to 4 years, I have an evaluation trying to explain what my impact is and why my job is needed. Teachers, the paperwork, yeah. I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to go into what I think is important. And I propose that before we talk about how we want individuals to take up their responsibility in the process of socioeconomic impact, we need to turn to the organizational responsibility first. I'd like to suggest 2 complementary action lines. 1, create the context for impact strategy and activities to be part of the careers of researchers. That will help with the individual responsibility. 2nd, invest in the underlying competencies and support structures. So first, career models. We need career models which recognize and reward impact, the process of getting to impact. We are seeing 2 models emerging in Europe at least. One is the integration of the process, value creation, and impact as a part of the academic duty. It's a holistic approach, which should break down the attitude that socioeconomic impact is an add-on, linking it to more the way how we do research, how we teach. And in that sense, it feels a bit like open science. It's the responsible way to do research. That's the route my university has taken, clearly. Second, the creation of very specific and therefore separate career tracks. A route, for instance, the Netherlands have taken. You have people that are clinicians, you have the researcher, you have the entrepreneur, you have the teacher. That's another model. I'm seeing a mix of both of them happening in Europe. And I'm understanding that within Spain, there's also kind of like thoughts about how to do this in the future. In both cases, you need to have a discussion on responsible and equitable assessment, including the use of metrics and indicators. You need to instill a large amount of trust and freedom in your academics. And you need to talk about the place of basic research in all of this. You need to have clarity on what kind of organization you are and what role society plays in this, and what it means to be a member of such an academic community. And also, don't forget to involve HR in this conversation. Next. Next is investing in impact literacy and competency, not just on the level of the individual academics and researchers, but also other staff, across leadership and professional support staff. And if you do not have support staff, think about creating those roles too. and making clear what academics can expect from this support. Impact is clearly a group effort, and we see the immense benefits intermediaries and brokers bring to this effort. And you definitely need a group, because the amount and the diversity of competencies needed for value creation and impact is huge. I suggest looking into work of 𝗲𝗏𝘁𝗶𝗃 and some colleagues on this, reflecting on the quality of knowledge brokers and identifying over 80 competencies needed in 11 areas to do work on impact. Support comes with training, so that means developing a strategy on your training as well. And remember my mention about involving HR, you'll need them here as well if you set up training. To round off, I also think it's important to explicitly connect both action lines. Have an open conversation about career planning, research approach and methodology, societal responsibility, and the organizational tone of voice, both internal and external, the organizational bandwidth, the capacity you have to support all your researchers. How can you make sure that creativity can still bloom? And what support and training is actually needed? How do you differentiate between junior researchers and senior researchers in all of this? And how do we take care of the mental well-being and vulnerabilities of all parties involved?
Thank you, Esther. You want to follow up? David, you want to start?
Oh, 80 competencies. Did I really say that? Yes. Yeah, I did. You don't have to do them all. What we did was we synthesized 4 competency frameworks and took from about 120, 130 competencies down into 80 competencies, which we were in 11 categories. And then we went back out and did a survey of knowledge mobilization, knowledge broker practitioners, not researchers primarily, but practitioners. And we identified the top 10, which are mostly things that are not surprising: communications, networking, learning how to synthesize tools, learning. I said communications. That was like the top one. Interestingly, internal communications, external communications was important, internal within your organization. One respondent said they never practice internal communications. I figured that was like a consultant who only needs to talk to themselves. But internal and external communications were at the top of the list, so I don't think that would surprise anyone. But it's interesting. I should actually say about myself, I am professional staff at the university, so the role of professional staff is near and dear to my heart, and it is focusing on my personal interest is on, I like how you said mental health, because many of these jobs in Canada are soft funded. They're not core jobs at the university. And that's and all of our universities. Raise your hand if your university's got lots of money to spend, right? Same in Canada and in Ontario. So that's a really important point, thinking about the mental health, the security of these people who are working, not with all 9,000 of your researchers, but potentially. Any thoughts, David and Paula?
Sure. Yeah, I think I take from Esther's introduction here that we need to turn impact into sort of nuts and bolts of an academic career. You know, we need to definitely translate what it means to do impact into rewards and recognition. And as long as this work is not really recognized or not rewarded as part of the ordinary reward structure, then it will always be an add-on that will sort of be put on top of researchers' already mounting list of other assignments. So the idea of having a responsible impact culture and building a coherent impact strategy has a lot to do with skills, as David said, but also has a lot to do with incentives. And we know, all of us in the room probably, that incentives in research and science seems to be very sort of monolithic these days. It's all about publications and publications and publications, and then sometimes a little bit of teaching. But when you actually look at how professors are chosen and how they are hired, and when you look at how people are rewarded, how they're promoted, what gets them their grants, what gets them their annual performance-based bonus for salary, It's all about the top-tier academic publications. And we need to put impact in there. And I think that has to do, again, with mental health. It's also building a more inclusive and more responsible research culture, something I hope we can come back to later in the afternoon, that impact is part of the mix and needs to be seen as something to be rewarded within your research team or department or faculty. And of course, there might be this sort of tendency that impact is something somebody else should do, especially perhaps in that type of Dutch model in which we are all sort of focusing on what we are best at. And I think that cognitive division of labor, it makes sense in science. We are pretty good at specializing. But sometimes it's also important to take a little bit of time off and speculate and hypothesize, how could my research make a difference to someone outside research? And what you would find there, and I'm sure I'm probably preaching a little bit to the choir, is that the moment you start involving stakeholders, partners, patients, citizens, policymakers, it also enriches your research the other way around. So you actually are able to pose better research questions. And we also have some data showing that publications that was co-created or even co-written with stakeholders from society, that is, they were impactful from the beginning, even have a higher impact score in terms of citations. So these things does not need to be sort of mutually exclusive in the end of the day, and I hope we can dig more into more details. They need to be more mutually inclusive.
Yeah. Yeah, if I may add, I think that from what we heard from the three of you, and I fully agree, it is clear that the impact journey, it cannot be led to an individual by itself. I think we all agreed on this. So I don't think this pressure should be there, but it doesn't mean that it has to be, they have to be taken out of this responsibility. I would also say, and linking it to the last question about reluctant researchers, that it should not be compulsory. So it's, if you have difficulties with specific researchers because they are reluctant, try to find others that are happy to engage in the impact journey. So the impact journey cannot be a research alone or an impact officer alone. It needs the institution, the institutional support, institutional diagnosis, strategy, competences, etc. So I would say that, and relating to this also, when we say that nobody's asking a doctor or a teacher, I think you were very clear on this. I think the same with science. Since the very old days, science has been, like any other profession, has had the need to explain what is the return. It could be initially, in science initially, that was based on articles, and that was enough, whether you publish or not. Later on, the evolution was more into citations, or how the uptake or the capacity to raise funds. And nowadays, it is a more ecosystemic and more approach because it includes impact. So with this, I would just leave maybe if there are comments from the floor.
Can I just pick up on one thing on the reluctant? The reluctant impacted researcher. So it depends on your context. In Canada, we don't have impact assessment as a core part of scholarship, as a core part of the academy. We're not like the UK, which has the research excellence framework. Impact in Canada, we do really as a function of your grant application. Because every grant application needs some form of impact strategy, and then researchers who are just wanting to do this because it's important to them. It's important that they, and especially early career researchers, are coming in, they want to change the world, and yet we ask them to teach all these courses, and so our job is to help them take time off their desk so they can focus on impact, so that we can help them craft those impact strategies in the grant applications. And in Canada, and this is not true of everywhere, the activities of mobilizing, of partnering, of engaging are eligible expenses on your grant application. So build them in. This is not a 10-hour-a-week job that an undergrad student can do for you. These are real skills that need to be really funded through your grant application. And so if you're a reluctant researcher, if you're not filling out a grant application, you don't have to worry about impact. Come to Canada.
Okay, thanks, David. Thank you all. So are there any questions related to any of this?
Does anyone have a microphone to run to a question? Yolanda's got a microphone. And
Yeah,
the
so
question's right in front of Yolanda.
Oh, yeah, there's one there.
Thank you. Good afternoon and thanks a lot. I have kind of a philosophical question that is related to what you just said now in the end, which is we very much connect impact to evaluation, right? So, and we kind of have a very operational approach to it. But I'm thinking about the individual researchers and why would they be motivated to work on this, and instead of only having a stick approach, like you will be evaluated by this, so this is an obligation, it's a responsibility. There is also the other dimension that you mentioned, which is people have values and they want to change the world. And this could be a very positive and constructive way to build their interest into the impact. How do we do that in our organizations?
That's exactly the question that we had in our university. We don't have an assessment system, and not all of our researchers go for European funding, where impact is important. So we have this huge potential of people that can think about impact without actually having to operationalize it and really have to evidence it. And so what we did is we work the other way around. We make sure that the incentives are there if you want to do it. So, of course, we invest in pre-award support for European funding and all these things, but what we try to build in are just those values, saying, look, we are a university, and yes, we have the benefit of providing a space where you can think and where you can try things and fail, but at the same time, it's a community of people who want to change the world and want to have an impact. But in order for them to be able to do that, you need a lot of things in place. You need that tone of voice. You need to have a communications department that actually helps them if they want to reach out, if they want to communicate, and also walks the talk, doesn't just send out press releases about the next cure for cancer or the next ranking that we're number 200 or something like that. So you have to change the way that you actually speak as an institute. Next thing is the whole HR system. If people want to take up impact, there should be a system that doesn't kind of punishes them if they do. So what we have is a whole career system where if people want to say for the next 4 years, I want to focus on my societal outreach, they can. They will not be punished for it. They will not be compared with their colleague who says, I want to have a publication in science, something like that. But it's all these little nuts and bolts. It's providing some funding for research, for outreach activities. It's having knowledge brokers in research groups, helping them. So it's a whole, I'm not supposed to use the word ecosystem because biologists get really upset, but it is an ecosystem of all these little changes that amount to a big change. So I think it's more of this intrinsic motivation that you speak to and that you let them take those opportunities. And sometimes you push top down and you say, look, we're now only assessing impact once in a while, but there's still opportunities for everyone else. And like Paula said, we're not forcing anyone. Impact is a relay marathon. And if you are at the head of the relay course, handing the baton to someone else, that is fine too. What we're expecting from our researchers is just to know where they are in that race, what they can provide to the bigger change in the world.
Esther, So you were going to ask a question?
Well, I think the other David was going to follow up, but you can.
I say I wasn't looking at you.
That's what was going to
We look
happen.
alike. We just look so much alike. You go. I've talked enough.
We'll get it back to you in a second, David. But I just wanted to say that I love the spirit of the question, and I think it's important to start by asking that question. So, what is it that motivates us to do good research? It's often not only to get publications out or even to get citations. It might be that this has now become so embedded within the incentive and reward structure that we have young generation of scientists who are only trying to sort of game their H-index and try to maximize on publications. But most of us did not come into research for the purpose of looking at some little chart in Google Scholar. We did it to make a difference. Whether it is to sort of, if not save the planet, then at least work on, mitigating pain or mitigating climate destruction or mitigating bad decisions or, creating better quality of life for citizens. And I think it's valuable to say that when we have the infrastructure and the incentives and the reward mechanisms in place, we still have to go back to the research teams and to the individuals and ask them, why would this be important for yourself to engage with impact and to go on the impact journey? And there it makes a lot of sense to start by simply asking the question, what is the purpose of your research? What is it that you're trying to achieve? And the moment you ask that question, you will get very, very different answers from different people, but they will start telling you about why did they do their PhD, about that patient group with a rare disease that they would like to see, mitigated or helped out or supported better. And that's when you have the first sentence of your impact strategy or your impact plan. So I very much agree that if you can be value-based in your impact strategy, you already come a long way.
And if I could follow up, you said that a researcher can choose their pathway for the next 4 years. Is that a Ghent thing or a Belgium thing or a Flanders thing? Like just because in Canada, no, right? No, you don't. You are hired. I mean, there's a overarching framework for all Canadian scholars is you're hired to do 40% research, 40% teaching, and 20% service. But in your university, and so is that unique to Ghent? Wow.
And it's almost unique in the world. We just made that decision. I think based on all the conversations that we had, and we had a big study on mental health, and we saw that 1 in 3 young researchers has an elevated risk for mental health issues. And we said something needs to change. That with climate change, with demographic and democratic disruption, you have to go back to the basics and to the values. And it's difficult to change that system because internationally we still have to be rated at excellent research. But it might sound a bit naive of us, but we think that a happy researcher is a good researcher. And in order for that researcher to be happy, we need them to be reaching out, be engaging with the stakeholders of their research, because that gives that clear connection to why am I doing this? Why am I getting up every morning? It's not because of that publication. It's because someone has sent me an email saying, thank you, you've changed my life. Even if you're in linguistics, working on one small element, there's a lot of science communication that you can do.
Thank you, Esther. Okay, on that positive note, so is there one quick question about another one? Yeah.
Coming back to Ghent, which I think is wonderful as a model, do you have, by any chance, just by curiosity, any evidence that this approach is working?
Excellent question. Mm-hmm. That's when we come to that connection with the other policy areas in your university. So when we implemented the system, it was a collaboration between the research department, the teaching department, and HR. But HR was just the vehicle in that sense. They wanted to make sure that there was a process in place with deadlines and that people knew when they were going to be evaluated and so on. What we're trying to do now is actually break in again, because we're in the business of impact, so we want evidence of that impact. And we would be the first bad student if we're not looking into that. It's a difficult conversation, I have to be honest. I see my vice-chancellor giving speeches all over the world about this amazing system, but we're not tracking it as we should. So yes, I'm allowed to say this. There probably won't be a recording here, but we need to do it the same way. And we need to, but there's GDPR issues and so on. What I do is I talk a lot with people, but that's anecdotal evidence. And I am seeing complete opposites. People saying this was the best conversation I ever had in my entire career, because for the first time, people just asked me, what is it you want to do? And we think this is important. On the other hand, there's still departments where they do a copy-paste of the old system with the checklist. How many publications, how many projects? And then by the end of it, have you done this? But the system has changed in the sense that everyone progresses. So it's no longer a competition. And it's based on narratives. It's not based on little boxes and checklists. And that is making a difference. Yeah. And especially for impact, it's making a difference because it's making clear that we don't just trust indicators to talk about impact.
David, you want to add something?
Yeah, sure. Just to say that, I mean, I like the spirit of the question and I understand it, but successful or evidence for success, compared to what? Yeah. So if you want to compare that to your rankings, probably universities, my own included, that are working strategically with impact, we are reallocating 30% of our funding based on impact now, compared to only a couple of years ago when it would be 90% of funding only allocated on bibliometrics. And we can see there is no drop in rankings. I'm not a big believer in rankings, I will say that immediately, but we can see very clearly that it's not compromising your research quality or your excellence. It might actually be the other way around, that you're enriching and your excellence by also encouraging and incentivizing impact. So the question is, so the question here is like, for me, it's also a question about leadership. It's not so much about does it pay off, or do we compromise our rankings, or it's also about making good decisions for healthy institutions, and that's why we pay our senior managers so much money to run all these institutes. Like vice chancellors, rectors, vice rectors, heads of departments. They also need to stand up and say, this is what our institution wants to do, and part of that is, of course, to have a good level of excellence. But another part of that is also to have a meaningful role in society. So I want our senior research managers to be more explicit in their focus and in the emphasis on impact as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's have a third question. You can keep it brief.
I'll try and keep it brief. Thank you very much.
Please. Have a lot of ground to cover.
I just like to be a devil's advocate a bit, as we said that researchers don't wake up in the morning or don't go to work thinking they want to publish. But as we know, research positions are very precarious, and people often don't have positions until early 40s, so they may have started out with a purpose, but by the time they reach a certain level of grants after grants after grants of soft money, they may really be in it because they want a stable position. And so if we tell them, add this on, and it may not contribute then in terms of getting a stable position, they may be reticent. So, I mean, I think it's the system that has to be fixed, but there is this generation that's through precarious, we all know this.
You're not a devil's advocate, you're a realist, and it's change that will take time. You have to recruit other types of people. We have been recruiting mirror images, and that's of course safe because our PIs know that when they recruit someone, when they hire a PhD student, they know there needs to be a PhD at the end of this. People don't need to be lose their concentration in that whole pathway, but I think it's a shared responsibility. When I'm in front of a group of academics, I sometimes get a little bit frustrated, like, organize yourself. If you think this is important, let us know, because often they say, but it's the system. me not changing the system. Yes, we are. We are really trying to change the system. Things like 𝗬𝗏, really important to change systemic, make systemic changes. But we need all of you. You're our stakeholders too. So if we can co-create this change, that would be really helpful. And I think a lot of funders are now looking at different things. And yeah, it changes behavior as well. I think at one point, all of a sudden, the world will have changed and we will have stayed the same. We cannot let that happen. But you're a realist and it will take time, of course. There's no easy way to do this.
Okay, thank you, Esther. So I think that so the conversation we've had ties in quite well with the next part of the presentation, which is sorry. The title's wrong, I didn't realize. So that should be Institutional Perspectives on Impact, okay? So, but the questions are right, so don't worry. What should an institutional impact strategy consist of? How do we combine the need to have an institutional impact strategy goals with the autonomy of researchers and research managers? And how do we engage stakeholders which may not have an impact-minded culture? I mean, it's an evolution of what we're talking about, more focused on the institutional perspective. David, you're the leader on this.
Great, thank you very much. I'm not going to answer the questions one by one. It'll be part. But first, who's in the audience? Raise your hand if you are at a CERCA center. A CERCA Institute, yeah, excellent. Put your hands down. Raise your hands if you're at a university. Okay. Raise your hands. Other researchers, what, in a hospital? Other research settings? Raise your hand if you haven't raised your hand yet. Okay, so what type of organization do you work in? Oh, you're with him. Okay, excellent. Over here, someone raise their hand. You're not, yes?
We are an alliance of independent research institutes across Europe.
Okay.
We are an advocacy alliance.
Okay, super. Anyone else? Anyone who raised their hand because they hadn't raised their hand? Yes, little hand.
We are at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center.
Okay.
So we are research infrastructure plus a lot of researchers.
Great. Any government folks? Oh, a couple, yeah. Hi, government folk. Which level of government? Where are you?
Well, we are in the agency which is managing grants, research and university grants.
Excellent, thank you. And any community members or stakeholders or like patient-public partners in research? No. Okay. Thank you for that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening in Canada. At my university, York University, we are in Toronto. We're a suburban university, so we're at the north end of the city of Toronto. We've got a very large downtown university called the University of Toronto. That's not us, but we are. We do like to. We've got 1 million people north of us and 1 million people south of us. North of us, not in the city of Toronto, is York Region, and it's really a microcosm of Canada. It's got the fastest growing new Canadian population, so immigrants in Canada. 58% of people who live in York Region were not born in Canada. That's a huge strength and brings opportunity. We've got the fastest growing 18 to 24-year-old population in Canada. So we've just launching a new campus in this town of Markham, north of us. We've got environmentally protected Oak Ridges Moraine. We've got inner city issues in Markham, and we've got rural economies happening in Georgina, north of us. And there's a First Nations reserve in just an island in Lake Simcoe. So really, York Region is a microcosm of what's happening in Canada, and that kind of determines what we are at York University. We care about rankings, we care about publishing, but our eyes are on rankings, but our feet are in our local community. And I think that's really important to think about how we position ourselves as a university to, yes, be publishing our papers, but really have some grassroots influence. So here's my first suggestion at your university. Take a look at the strategic plan for your university. is impact there. Most universities now and research centers and other research organizations want to make a difference in their local and their global communities. No university says, yeah, we don't want to be relevant. So look at that and see how does that sit in your institution? I'm sure it's there. And in my university, we say we're expanding the influence of our work through broadening and deepening our external partnerships and engagement in the generation of sharing knowledge and creative works. So it's right in not our mission statement, but our academic plan that we're going to be doing this engagement work, sharing of knowledge, and working on partnerships. We want to maximize our impact by increasing our innovation activities, and I have the innovation and the research portfolio in my job. And the innovation is commercialization, patenting, and licensing to industry. It is entrepreneurship, but it is also knowledge mobilization. We founded our knowledge mobilization unit in 2006. My background back in the 90s was as a tech transfer officer at the University of Toronto. So for us, innovation really is not just commercial pathways to impact, but impact pathways through policy and social services. So that's what we're doing at our university. Our funders are also now all expecting impact strategies. The Canadian Institutes of Health Research, which is our federal health research funder, has just about a month ago released a new definition of research excellence. This is how they're describing what good research has to be, and you're not going to find an H factor anywhere in this definition. That CIHR, Canadian Institutes of Health Research, believes that excellent research is rigorous, inclusive, conducted in ways that meaningfully integrate a diversity of perspectives, disciplines, and methods in order to maximize impact and benefit to society. The definition includes knowledge mobilization, but also equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's also open science, patient-oriented research, and indigenous knowledge. So it's no longer enough, if you're a health researcher in Canada, just to publish your papers. That the funder of the research is expecting knowledge mobilization and other related things like open science, like EDI. But there was a question that came down, it's not on this, but it was the first draft of questions about, oh my God, what do you mean by impact? What do you mean by knowledge mobilization? I'm putting the whining in here because that's what I hear a lot. So what about definitions? And definitions are really important. Linguists would tell you that. He's a linguist.
I'm a linguist, for the record, for those who don't know it.
But it's also important to understand the definitions of the people you're talking to. Back in the day, I say that like it was 20 years ago, because it was 20 years ago, there was a thing called a KT Wiki, and there were over 100 terms that were part of knowledge translation of KT. CERCA is working on an impact glossary, and there's 67 terms in there. You're never going to agree on one single term. So here's one of my bits of advice. Don't get stuck in what I call definitional dystopia, because it takes a long time to figure out what does ester mean, what does Tony mean. So my advice is don't get stuck there. Use the words that you want to use the words, but tell people what you mean by those words. But when you go into another space, understand what words they use. Knowledge mobilization is the words that I've stuck in Canada, but a lot of my researchers really want to talk about engaged scholarship. Mobilization isn't a word that they take nicely to. And so when you're in different spaces, if your funder expects you to be practicing patient-oriented research or patient and public engagement, then use those words. Don't try and tell a funder who's looking for patient engagement that you're going to be doing knowledge mobilization. So be multilinguistic and learn. I would say my advice is don't get stuck on your definition. Just be open to the other definitions as well. So institutions, my institution doesn't have an impact strategy. Does yours? Does yours? Yeah, kind of.
Last time I looked.
But we do have, as I said, we do have impact in our academic plan. We do have impact as part of our strategic research plan. And Mark Reed, who's a scholar in the UK, released a paper last year. He gathered over 70 impact strategies from universities around the world, and he analyzed them, and at about 1/4 of them were standalone impact strategy, and about 3/4 were impact as part of research or other types of plans. And what was really cool about that paper was he actually, as a supplemental file, all 70+ strategies are there. So if you're really interested in the institutional perspective, the institutional strategy, you can look, just Google Mark Reed and impact strategy, and you'll probably find the plan. But for thinking about your institution, Julie Bailey, who is amazing, and she's now just moved to the London Northeastern University, she and I developed this concept of impact literacy, and it's to make sure that you and your institution are thinking about impact in a healthy way. She is a sexual health psychologist, so she comes at things of looking at healthy, unhealthy behaviors, and living in a research excellence framework dominated world. She saw a lot of unhealthy behaviors that were manifesting at UK universities. And so a healthy impact institution maximizes potential for people to learn about and to collaborate on and deliver impact in ways that are inclusive, ethical, acknowledged, and resourced. So it's really about people, because this is all a people-based activity. It's about learning, it's about collaborating, it's about being inclusive, ethical. This comes to the values that you asked about, so thank you for that. And it's resourced. And unhealthy institutions don't do that. And so think about your institution. Is it resourced? Is there opportunities to learn? Is there opportunities to collaborate within the institution? And to help think about that, we developed the institutional health check. How am I doing? Wrap it up, David?
-1 minute.
Minus 1 minute. Okay, I'll skip that. Conclusions. What I suggest. Don't work in a vacuum. If you are at your institution, at your university, you are likely, if you want to file a patent on your thing you've just invented out of your research, there's someone there to help you do that. Find the other people that are there to help you do that and do the other elements around. It might be communications, might be research data management, it might be community engagement. Look at your institutional plan. If there is impact in your plan, there should be someone helping you to do it. And then the coalition of the willing, you mentioned this. Develop a coalition of the willing. You're not the only researcher or the research support staff that wants to do this work. There's others that want to do this work, and you might just have to self-organize in order to start moving the needle at your institution.
Thank you, David. So any follow-up comments on this?
Yeah, we must. You covered a lot of ground, which is good. Two small things. It is difficult. Often the impact officer is the only one. Yeah. So find ambassadors as well, not just the coalition of the willing, but people that are willing to go through fire for you, because you probably won't have the mandate to change everything. And in these kind of setups, it's mostly us, kind of the working bees that are here, and not leadership. We need to change that in some way so that they can hear those conversations, but we can make them hear it if we organize, self-organize. So excellent to have a community of practice. Keep it up and engage with your colleagues. Within your own institution, it's not always that easy. I have even cried after talking to the tech transfer office. It's two worlds sometimes, but you have to keep your idealism high. The second thing is the researchers themselves. If you provide a lot of tools, that's good. If you make them find each other, that's also good, that they can learn from each other, because often they don't listen to us necessarily, but they will listen to each other and use their ego sometimes to see, like, look, this person got a lot of attention, but it's because of something very well done. But at the same time, don't forget that you as a knowledge broker, as an impact officer, cannot always jump in. It's really important that the authenticity of the relationship between the researcher and the community is between them. And we cannot step in, we can facilitate, but finding that common language, finding those things, those activities that they can collaborate on is something that needs to happen between those people, between those individuals. And you can provide the strength for the researcher to do that, But the authenticity of the relationship needs to be between the stakeholders and the researcher themselves, because that trust and that respect for each other is really important.
Yeah, I was listening to you and I was thinking, and this relates to the relationship between researchers and stakeholders. Yeah, trust is really very important, and this takes time. It takes time, and it's very easy to lose it. So it's really important how you establish your relationships of trust. Another aspect that I think is crucial is understanding their perspectives. So putting yourself in their shoes and understanding what they need and how you can provide what they need. So perspective, and then also getting their attention. Sometimes they are very busy people. I can think of, I am from the biomedical and health research disciplines. Managers of hospitals are key stakeholders, but it's very hard to have just 1 minute of their attention to convince them for sometimes you need this elevator pitch, this moment in which you get their attention, and then you have to have worked very well what are your key messages. So working really seriously on the difference between communicating your results to a scientific audience or to a stakeholder audience. So it is not that after publishing you already have it there. You have to work on how you re-elaborate your messages oriented to your stakeholders. That's one thing I wanted to comment. And the other thing relating to what David is saying is, it seems to me, but this is a personal perception, that there is a question of the culture of the organizations. So if you see the organization, be it as a research center or a university, as an organization that produces knowledge, you will organize this organization accordingly to what is a production system. So you really need to meet deadlines, you have timelines, you have to monitor the activity, efficiency is very important, competitiveness is very important, and goal achievement or profit. Now, if you think of the organization as a transformative organization, not that produces, but transforms through the production of knowledge, then you may need different values in how the culture of the organization. So let's say, for example, what I said, transdisciplinary alliances, co-creation, cooperation rather than competition, purpose development, value, policy and innovation, etc. So I would say there is an important reflection also on how you manage the organizations. And there must be surely new ways to do that, more collaborative.
Thank you, Una.
Sure.
You add something that...
Yeah, no, I think it's true what Esther said, that we are covering a lot of ground here, and I think it's important that what we already established is sort of the significance of incentives and skills, and also, of course, mobilizing the individual scientists and making it sort of meaningful to work with either external stakeholders or partners, or somehow knowledge diffusion or translation. But it also takes investment, and it takes infrastructure. And that's where we are now in the conversation, that if you have a good infrastructure for impact planning and perhaps also impact assessment, if you have a unit, if you have somebody who can help you out, like a group of knowledge brokers, they might be located within tech trends or in other strategic units. You know, you can get a lot of leverage from doing that, and you can sort of prepare the ground for the research teams and the PIs to come in with their problems and with their challenges and get advice on how to meet the stakeholder, how to get a good understanding of their knowledge needs, and perhaps even, you know, organize workshops and partner days and matchmaking and all these things that would be, I would say, rather impossible for the individual scientific team to organize, but that really sort of needs to be institutionalized. And that's where the Canadian example is very impressive, what David has been doing with Research Impact Canada, and what other countries as well have been doing in terms of setting up these alliances or partnerships in which you're training people to actually facilitate impact. It takes some of the burden off the individual scientists and the teams and sort of facilitates or offers some services to the community that then can be utilized for the collective benefit. So there is a lot to be said there, and it does tie back into questions about funding, of course, and also about leadership. Somebody needs to support these institutions, otherwise it won't fly. And then I also took from David's comments that I really like your idea, David, that we shouldn't get entangled in definition dystopia. And I think there is also a more even philosophical background for that, namely the fact that in a certain sense we cannot define impact universally, because impact might look very differently from different disciplines, from different stakeholders, and even from different individuals. So it ties again back to the idea about the values, that impact is something you need to define in a certain sense yourself, working with either the funding agency or the university or the research team. And I mean, in this sense, there is also a dark side to impact, namely the fact that what might be impactful to one group of stakeholders might turn out to be a grimpact for another group of stakeholders. And for you to steer that research integrity and research ethics, that you're deploying this new AI technology that's super helpful in a hospital, but it can also be used by the police to do surveillance or by the military to do more targeted interventions, then you would need, to sort of have a very clear ethical impact plan in place. And again, I would say from experience and working with many funding agencies and universities, you cannot leave this to the individual research team. You need somebody at the level of an impact unit to help you out, fleshing out, does this really lead to desirable change? Or does it lead to the opposite sort of grimpact or negative impacts?
And that's a really important point. We always tend to assume that impact is beneficial. Mm-hmm. And we don't talk about when it's not. In Canada and other countries with a colonial legacy, we've got generations of trauma that have been created by researchers working on Indigenous communities and Indigenous people. And now we're really rethinking and looking at decolonial approaches. And the ethics is really cool. And really cool, I say, because we talked about this. Few people are really working on this. I think the ethics, the values that underpin this work is underexplored from a scholarly perspective. And it's a space that some people are starting to kick at, and I know you're trying to have conversations. But okay. Last thing, sorry, it's me. But by ethics, I mean don't necessarily go to your ethics office. Right? Yeah, it's not a compliance thing, right? It's really about values. And so do involve your ethics office if they're open to that, especially because they may be thinking of the ethics of community-based research, which might challenge traditional ethical frameworks. So that might be a route into talking with your ethics office.
Great. Thank you. Also, it's time for questions if someone has them on that. Yeah.
Sorry. I have two questions, but I'm going to start with one. I really like the conversation of the stakeholders related to all this impact thing, because it's a very concrete way that we can see how to walk the talk. But for example, our institutes, they go all the continuum of the research, from the more fundamental one to the really close to the market or to the hospital one. It is really hard to talk about engaging stakeholders with fundamental research. It's not the same thing as with other parts of the spectrum. So any ideas on how to start this?
Well, we'll have a whole topic on this, so yeah. But you can start pointing.
A small bit, because I know David will talk about this. The experience I have is don't avoid that conversation with the fundamental researchers, and understand where they are coming from. But what I've seen that works in my university is they will then focus their efforts more on the general idea of what's the position of science in the world, rather than purely communicating about what they do. They become experts, they become kind of poster boys and girls for a scientific point of view, and seeing why fundamental science is so important in a lot of applied, and that's maybe, I never talk about societal relevance of research, because that leads you down a rabbit hole about your research is more important than your research, therefore your impact will be more important than your impact. No, what is it that makes you a scientist, and what's the kind of the lessons we can learn from the scientific process? If you can involve them in that kind of thing. So we have a museum, a science museum. We involve them in things like that. And that's just a little taste that they then get of interacting. And if you then combine that with the fact that value creation is also part of the entire life cycle, you don't have to wait for the results. It can just be your state of mind when you start out, and don't force them to have interactions with the stakeholders. There's several ways to have engaged research and involve stakeholders without actually having to sit down with them. It's talking to other researchers that might be directly involved, things like that. So find what fits their type of research and try to have an answer for them each time that they contact you.
Thank you, Esther. Do you have any other questions about this?
I can perhaps also just briefly, without preempting the discussion we're about to have in 2 minutes about exactly this question, I will just give you an anecdote. I was at some point hosting an impact workshop for a group of fundamental scientists for a funding agency. So these were like almost near to sort of Nobel Prize level, like super senior in their 50s or 60s, having worked their entire career, and like the most prominent research instrument we have in Denmark and in the Scandinavian countries. So you're pretty high up there, beyond an ERC advanced grant. And you know, there was this guy, this one mathematician sitting there in the crowd with his hands folded all the time and looking very angry at me and saying, you know, I don't care about my impact. I'm a basic scientist. I'm trying to, you know, formulate new mathematical laws that will change our understanding of the universe in 30 years from now. And I said, well, okay. But how do you imagine that people will change their understanding of the universe in those 30 years? And he said, like, what do you mean? They will go and read my research. And then I asked him, like, how do you make it available? Well, I can tell you that. I give interviews to New York Times, I'm on the BBC, I do documentary filmmakings, I'm having a new exhibition at the local art museum, and you know, I'm writing all these popular science pieces. I'm like, okay, that sounds like impact to me. So while he was, you know, completely blue sky, curiosity-driven, kind of conservative, almost angry on the impact discussion, he was having tremendous impact every day of his academic life by trying to achieve something that would have a timeline of 30 years. So I'm preempting the discussion we're about to have, because there needs not to be any dichotomy or, you know, between basic research and impact. But I see the mindset where it's coming from. And of course, what he was opposing to was the idea that he was, you know, asked to only do interviews or only do popular science talks. That would, of course, make it impossible to then achieve his real scientific goal. But no one said that, you know, that's the only thing to be doing.
Can I just make it going? I think it's also related to the funding landscape, right? So to get funding, you are continuously asked to have a short-term impact. And this is True. Where it comes from many times, I would say.
May I? Just, if I may, that you might encourage the researcher to acknowledge impact, but think more in impact pathways rather than necessary. So who's the next person that wants to get my research? And maybe you're a basic scientist and the next person's an engineer. right? So you're going to publish your papers, but it's that baton pass that you talked about. So I would say if you're thinking about supporting a researcher in that space, get them to think about the impact pathways as well as just the impact that happens. Sorry.
And so you mentioned about greenback and the ethical considerations about what type of impact we should be supporting. So maybe favoring applications of AI in health rather than in the military. But when I look at institutional policies, I do not see much of this. So I'd like to hear if you have some reflections on that. And because what I see is universities, research centers thinking that the most impact they get, the better, whatever type of impact.
Yeah.
I think again, it depends on what discipline you're in. And in some disciplines, it's easier to have that conversation about the ethical aspect or having the negative aspect. What we're having a lot of discussions about now is activism and science. And where are the lines between an activist and a scientist, that kind of honest broker? And those are conversations you need to be having as well. There is no clear answer, by the way. It's just trying to find that point where you're still comfortable and where you feel that your science is not being abused and so on. But the other way around is also part of the conversation. I don't know whether you know about the trust code. For research integrity, we have the 𝗟𝗟 code. For partnerships with global partnerships or partnerships with disenfranchised communities and so on, we have the trust code, which shows you some sort of framework on how do you keep the conversation with that stakeholder and on those impacts, who's having the impact, and are you having the impact by almost doing unethical stuff with the community you're working in, or by abusing the community to have that impact. That's the framework that helps to have a conversation with your researchers as well. And it comes from the ethics side of things. And they really use it mostly for if you use materials from other countries or you do research, field work and things like that. But you can use it as a broader code of ethics for any type of engagement. So maybe look into that as well, the trust code. It's a tip.
David, you want to follow up?
I think, Ismail, thanks for that question, and I think it is a very difficult one, and I think especially in the impact community, we have sort of gotten used to the idea that we are often working with theories of change, and that there is sort of a cut-off point between your own sphere of control, what you're able to control as a research team, or even as a university, which is sort of within the scope often of your research activities, your outputs, and if you're good at controlling, and you have strong partnerships, you can also sort of control or influence your outcomes. So that's the immediate impact your research would have on the immediate environment, for example, a partner. Whereas it's often taken for granted methodologically that the long-term impact is outside the scope of our control or influence, that it's sort of up to society what it wants to make of or with our research. So there is a cutoff point, both in terms of sort of epistemic responsibility, that we cannot follow the research all the way into practice. It's the responsibility of the practitioners. And I guess also in terms of evaluation, we don't want to make it the duty or the responsibility of the scientist to actually go and create a company or promote a specific type of legislation. They're the advisor. They're doing the basic research. But what you can do is you can try to understand if your research field is written by any value conflicts. So talking to stakeholders is not only about value alignment, finding good playmates and finding people to work with. It's also about finding out is there tension. So what would potential misuse of my science look like? We often have a very good mapping of what a potential use would look like, a good use case. But think a little bit about what would a potential misuse case look like. Is there a value conflict here? I'm having this new partnership. We have 10 companies. 2 of those companies are doing things that I'm not comfortable about. So I had myself a big research project on algorithms and democracy. You know, all the right buzzwords. scientific social integrity, the future of algorithmic decision making, critical media studies. And then one of our partners happened to be Microsoft Denmark. And you're like, yes, they're providing data, they're providing some databases and some compute power, but they're also doing a lot of other things at the same time. So we would have to have conversations in our team if we could have this partner, and whether or not we would end up creating GRIMPACTs, because this research could be utilized for purposes we were not in control of. So there your theory of change becomes also a way of mapping potential misuses or conflicts of interest. But as Esther said, we cannot guarantee this. That it will, of course, be in the hands of the end user, which is definitely not the university researcher.
Okay, thank you, David. So if in the interest of time, okay, yeah, sure, great. So in the interest of time, I think we should move to the next topic, which has briefly been introduced already. I don't know if the title is going to be right, no. But, so it's basic research and impact. So the basic question is, well, it has been said. So we're doing basic research, this is the basis on which scientific knowledge builds. Any impact we have will be distant and difficult to demonstrate in tangible terms. So what the researcher was saying to David. Plus, we do insert any discipline in social sciences and humanities. So we got a lot of these comments. And this last question, we put it here verbatim, especially because of what it presupposes, which is how can we combine the excellence we're required to show as researchers with the impact sections we are now required to fill in to get funding. So, two separate things, how we combine them. David, please.
Sure. So I think we already covered in our conversation up until now a couple of the items at the slide here in terms of basic research and impact. And I will also admit that we all refused to do a rehearsal this afternoon in order to keep the discussion lively and dynamic. And as you can see, this also means that we are sort of crossing into each other's topics, which I think is fine. So let's keep it like that. I mean, first of all, I think it's important to state that there is no real dichotomy between basic research and impact. On the opposite, some of the most profound examples of research-based impacts in society have been driven by basic research. So take as one example the first programmable computer. It was developed at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton by von Neumann 60 years ago. And it came out of a complete, you can say, curiosity-driven project that was blue sky. Of course, also at a later point integrated with military interest, with a lot of civic interest. But at the most profound level, it was produced by curious minds. And the Institute in Princeton for Advanced Study is a place where Flexner early on spoke about the free play of free intellectuals, where people could really sort of investigate what ideas was key to science and not so much to society. He speaks about the usefulness of useless knowledge, so how to invest in research that have no immediate impact into society. And then I think, as we already established in our conversation, if you then want to be a little bit more specific and say, okay, basic research does lead to impact, as David said, what would an impact pathway then look like? So if you're working in climate change science or climate science, how would a good policy recommendation look like? If you're working in biomedical, what would a clinical trial look like, or even a clinical advice? And you can then use all the tools that we just spoke about for an entire hour to sort of work with your basic research teams to find out, would there be a meaningful pathway from the basic research you're creating within your team to some application. But here we have to be a little bit cautious, again, not to scare our dear basic researchers away from the impact discussion. And one way I would encourage you to do this is by not focusing too exclusively on only one type of impact. And we do have a bias in conversations like the one we are having now towards instrumental impact. So that's impact that goes into society and solves a well-known or predefined problem. Somebody with a problem wants a solution, and they call the university, or they become part of a grant as a partner or stakeholder, and then the scientists have to sort of help them co-create or co-design a solution. This is sort of your ordinary impact pathway. But there are other types of impact than only instrumental. For example, conceptual impact. Raising awareness about a certain issue in society is something many people working in blue sky research often would be willing to do. We also have in a taxonomy of impact, for example, enlightenment impact. That's actually bringing wisdom and knowledge to society. And again, this doesn't just trickle down by itself. So if you're into creating enlightenment impact, you would need perhaps to do something on public outreach, on science communication, on disseminating your research. The same with relational impact, how different disciplines can relate to each other, create new avenues for research that then later on translates into impact, could also very much be part of the journey in basic research. So my basic encouragement would be to say, if you want to really work deep with ERC grant holders or with some of your most sort of basic research teams, be a little bit cautious not to scare them away with this type of problem-solution nexus, but think more about impact as also reframing a question, raising awareness, perhaps even formulating an even more complicated question, complicating societal discussions, complicating what science does to society. You know, asking the odd, unorthodox question is also an impact. It might only be a micro impact or a relational impact, but it still fits into a societal conversation that we need to have. So that would be my 2 cents. And then perhaps also, because that's in the spirit of the questions we got for this afternoon, perhaps be a little bit careful with not perceiving excellence as something static or something we all know what is. We should be a little bit careful. The notion of excellence right now in Europe is changing, and the train is moving slowly, the train towards cultural change, but it is moving. 𝗂𝗏𝗃, the Coalition for Reforming Research Assessment in Europe, has more than 650 signatures right now. We can see how the European Research Council recently changed its own assessment procedure based on 𝗂𝗏𝗃. And we can see how universities like ESTAS and others, and also CERCA, is including impact assessments within a narrative of excellence. So I would say perhaps we need to be speaking about a more inclusive, sustainable excellence framework rather than only speaking about first excellence, then impact. I'll stop there.
Thank you, David. Esther?
I'll just add a little bit about social sciences and humanities. When we drafted our non-existent impact strategy, it's just a paper with suggestions and not a real strategy. The idea was, from leadership, let's find a strategy for social sciences and humanities impact in opposition to technology transfer for STEM. Very quickly it became clear that value creation, the process towards impact, is a case for all disciplines, and it's a case for interdisciplinarity without instrumentality. So sometimes you hear, this is an excellent project with technology transfer. Let's just get a psychologist or someone from communication sciences on board to make sure that if we have a product, that it sells. And then the other type that you see is the same thing in social sciences and humanities. To make this a bit more relevant, maybe let's introduce some engineers. No, it has to be on equal level. It has to really benefit the impact that you want to have. And that's a difficult discussion. We do still see the silos, and we do still see societal impact is for social sciences and humanities, and the engineers don't get that. We just make products. No, really, it's becoming this fluid system without boundaries, and it makes the most beautiful impact if you combine those things, because it also creates better researchers, more holistic researchers with an open mind. And what David just said, that's where the big breakthroughs have come from. People with a very open mind, curiosity-driven, which means they're also open to other disciplines. And I think we need to embrace that and make sure that they collaborate more, and that it's not impact for them and impact for them. Yeah.
You want to add anything?
Oh, I got tons to say, but
Okay.
I want Paula to have her opportunity.
Yeah, just what I think I really embrace what you said. I really liked what David said about, at the end of the day, impact. Sometimes it's about rephrasing questions. So not really about finding the response to your impact question, but really how you are phrasing your research questions, etc. No? And you mentioned this in the case of basic science. I think this is really very interesting.
Okay. So is it okay if we open the floor for questions? Okay, so there was a question at the back. Someone raised a hand. Yep.
Hi, thank you so much for this conversation. So there's a lot to unpack. I have many questions. I am now an impact officer at BSc, so it's basically STEM, but I actually come from the humanities. I'm from a US university, so very different context in terms of what impact means and how is it related. I'm going to try to be brief and just put some things, because I have so many questions and pending conversations, I guess. But so first, in terms of excellence and impact, and this is more of a comment, but if at my university I were to speak as a young researcher, as a PhD candidate, with my advisors from the humanities, literature, and art, with my advisors, the answer is very clear. This is against excellence, basically, very, very in hard terms. So they see that as a sort of a woke culture, just to put it one way. So it's sort of difficult. Then, as an impact officer, innovation officer, one of the things that it's more complicated for our researchers in terms of talking about impact, I'm talking mostly about European Commission Horizon Europe proposals and stuff like that. It's more than talking about the impact, which is difficult per se, is the measurement, right? The indicators. And I really like a lot the conversation we were having, and I do, as a humanist, believe very much in the conceptual impact. For example, if I study the concept of home in literature, this might have an impact in policies and how do we perceive what a home might be, but nobody's going to read literature dissertation to think about policies, right? So how do we measure these benefits, talking about positive impact? If it's difficult in sciences, it's more in other disciplines. And still, I agree that it doesn't need to be instrumental, but the same European Commission asks for KPIs and indicators. And I've read in a lot of evaluations that points were taken because there were not enough figures, enough numbers. So I don't know if you have some sort of answers to these issues, but thank you.
Yep. In fact, that's Paula's next topic, is it?
Yeah, but I mean, it's difficult to sort of tease everything apart here. But,
yeah. Well, let's go into the next topic then, or?
Well, I think we can.
Yeah, sure.
Answer the question.
So it's a super good question, and I think it really cuts to the core of what we are trying to discuss, and also very much to the core of what's happening in the international space of impact assessment. And it's of course not easy to measure conceptual impact, and of course again as many of us will recognize, it is easier, and there is a temptation to always measure what is most easily measurable, namely the more instrumental impact, so the patents, the licenses, the solutions, if you like, the partnerships, the missions. But what we could do is perhaps to put a challenge to ourselves and say, what would it look like if we were to make a good case for conceptual impact? And so I have been working with universities across Europe and other places to start building strategic data about their conceptual impact. So you just need to sort of start understanding how do we relate, who's attending to our research, at which stakeholder groups are we affecting with the research we are producing. You know, can you get some proxies? It might not be like indicators of final change, but it could be some indicators that would be useful still for an impact pathway. Some productive interactions, you know, who's attending to these meetings, who's actually showing up, who's referencing your concepts, if you like. There might be some scientific references for sure, but there is also some practical references, policymakers, testimonials. And then we easily, of course, drift from more indicator-based assessments into what we do at CERCA, namely more impact case study-based assessments. And within narratives and case studies, you have a much bigger chance of accounting for your conceptual or relational impact. Because it's completely right what you're saying. This is harder to just sort of get off the shelf from your local data provider or from your Elsevier or Springer Nature to say what was the conceptual impact in society. You might try to experiment with alt metrics or social media uptake, but I'm not a big believer in those metrics. What you want to do is perhaps to start experimenting and then in the end of the day tell your constituents that they need to understand that impact should be described in a case study rather than on a chart of high-performing and low-performing individuals or groups. Then you would make a better case. Interestingly enough, on the CERCA assessment committee that concluded yesterday, we had a historian and literary scholar from Cambridge, UK, who you would think is like sort of top science in the world. And what the person said was that actually the REF mechanism, the research excellence framework that David mentioned, had been very beneficial to humanities and social sciences because they had gotten a better chance of articulating what they're actually doing in society. And they're doing a lot that they would not be able to tell policymakers if it hadn't been for the impact assessments, because these results simply don't show up in normal rankings, in bibliometrics and scientometrics. So think about methodology and then perhaps, you know, do your own indicators, build your own indicators, basically.
And have I got a tool for you? So we did, in Canada, we don't have a ref, but we did look at the ref and we made some, because in Research Impact Canada, a network of 30, soon to be 38 research organizations building institutional capacity for this work. We also wanted to be able to assess impact, and we know we do this through narratives. So we took the research excellence framework, we stripped out some of the UK stuff, put in some Canadian stuff, but what it is, we added a semi-structured interview guide because you, in universities, aren't going to know whose minds have been changed. You aren't going to know the conceptual impact that has happened because it's not your minds, it's someone else's. So this semi-structured interview guide helps you guide conversations or interviews with stakeholders, with people with lived experience, with partners from research. And having collected that evidence of impact through testimonials, and you also ask for the documents to establish or to justify these testimonials, then there's a structured case study framework. And so if you look under, I'm going to pitch now, researchimpact.ca, that's our website, researchimpact.ca, and you just search for impact and engagement guidelines. That tool should show up. It's a tool that's got its own instructions, the semi-structured interview tool, and then the structured case study framework. So researchimpact.ca, and then impact and engagement guidelines.
Okay, so is there another question about basic research? Yeah, Ruth.
Yes, thank you. Hello? Yes, can you hear me? Yes, this is Rosina from the Living Lab for Health at 𝗲𝗃. Thank you very much for these very interesting inputs that you have given to us. I would like to reflect on the role of the person who has to be in charge of managing this transition that we are talking about here. You've talked a lot about a lot of competencies. That was very interesting. I think you said 80 competencies.
Yeah, but you don't need to do them all.
Really? Yeah. Okay. Some of you also talked about sometimes let it go, let the researchers do the engagement themselves. But then Paula talked about this need for transitions. So this requires transdisciplinarity, as you said. So we are seeing that the reaction is sometimes an impact officer, sometimes a living lab, sometimes even a transdisciplinary research center to deal with it. Not let the researchers do it, but create a research center to help them do it. That's being done, for example, in the center of Europe, in the Netherlands, in Germany. And I was wondering, how do we envisage the structure, the organizational structure among these intermediary structures that are being created? And whether you are further in this approach in Canada or in other continents. In Europe, we are creating partnerships. Partnerships are creating networks of living labs now. The impact officers, at least in the partnerships we are participating, are not there still, but they will be, by sure. But how do we imagine all these intermediary structures organized, or if we think they should be organized?
I think you need both still. So at our university, we have centers that are aimed at societal impact, and they have their own knowledge broker. So it's an impact officer, not on central level, but very close to the researchers and stakeholders of that research. So that's one thing that we invest in. On the other hand, we do have these supra-university structures within Flanders, like a structure that helps with public-patient interactions, PPI. I don't know what the correct, yeah, okay, good. So patient engagement organizations that are coordinated from one office, I should say. We have a citizen panel for the whole of Flanders that's being organized by a certain funder. We have an agency that is called 𝗲𝗏 and is a expertise center, a center of expertise on citizen science. So yes, create those platforms in collaboration with, of course, the academic world, but make sure that you don't outsource everything and that you still have the capacity within your own institution as well. Because sometimes the step is a bit big to go to one of those external intermediaries. And again, I'm stressing the authenticity of some of those things. Some things you need to do yourself and find your own benefits from it. So, but I would combine it. Invest in your own institution and make sure that your region has these platforms, these springboards of impact as well. And sometimes don't think too big. In our case, in Ghent, our library is one of our biggest partners. It's the living lab of the city, because every day more than 5,000 people cross the door of the library, and we have some research groups that have their office now in the library to make sure that there is continual interaction with the citizens of a city. So it's talking to your local government, it's looking at these supranational institutes, but also investing in your own institutes still.
There was a question there.
Sure, thanks. So my question is about rankings. David, you said that you keep your eyes on rankings, but the feed with your local community. And somebody else said that despite working on impact, you didn't lose in the rankings. But there are now some rankings which enter the game of impact and created those impact rankings. So what's your take on impact rankings? Do you think it's a genius idea of those ranking agencies to gain new clients and get richer? Or do you think it's a genius idea to really finally that the universities take into consideration impact and work on it to cater the needs of the ranking agencies, but also their own needs and the community's needs? And how would your impact ranking look like if you could create one, maybe?
We're recording this, so I'm not sure I can say what I really think.
We can edit things out if necessary.
Yeah. Rankings are important for my institution. They're not important for me. I think Times Higher Ed introduced the impact rankings 5 years ago, something like that. Not just research impact, like it's the impact across the institution and tagged towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And there's a whole methodology, and Western Sydney University seems to have figured it out because they're #1 a couple of years, 2-3 years in a row. And we do though at my university, I don't know, our Times Higher Ed, we're in these sort of 350 to 400 group, and yet we're number 33 on the Times Higher Ed Impact rankings. So we advertise that we punch above our weight on impact. It's a good tagline, but that's an institutional perspective. My perspective is, so your question is, what would an impact ranking look like? I think amongst my colleagues, if I think of us on stage and those that we know well, I would be, can I say shit upon? Yeah, take it, camera. We would be shit upon if we actually tried to propose an impact ranking, because it's kind of antithetical to what we do, in that we're not about who's doing it better, but we're about sharing what we do to lift everyone up. So an impact ranking wouldn't be about how good you are, but it's how much you're sharing and helping build others up. That would be my ranking.
Yeah, I think several of us can testify to that answer, David. But there might be a couple of things more to say about it. I mean, for example, the SDG-based ranking that we now see some universities are using to brand themselves is, of course, I would say it's perhaps to some extent a step in the right direction, at least in terms of public perception, that universities are willing to bring their impact, their societal impact, into their strategic communication. But when you start digging deeper into it, you find out that all this is, of course, still based on publications, and it's all derived from publications, namely like keywords and semantic modeling of how much are you mentioning SDG-related topics in your publications. And to no surprise, it's also the publication industry, which is now slowly dying, that's often circulating these rankings and have a big stake in them. So we should be careful also for the purpose David is mentioning, namely that in the best of all worlds, in which we are perhaps not currently living, impact is all about learning. It's about learning from your own practice. It's about building meaningful, authentic relationships. So all this cannot be compared across disciplines, neither across regions or countries or continents. It's very much a local exercise in building strong partnerships and trust. So I would be very cautious to start comparing performance across the board. But what you can do, we did that at Aalborg University. We have created, of course, as it is now become sort of obligatory, we have created an impact indicator. So it consists of 3 different clusters of data. One is on visibility, so how visible are our teams in society? How often do they interact with media? Media appearances are mentioned in public outreach. Another one is openness, so we are measuring the degree and level of open access, open data, open innovation. So it's in the indicator. And the last one is open collaboration. So we're actually asking all our researchers to submit to the evaluation all their collabs, all their partnerships, in a certain sense, all their interactions, as long as they're not only sort of one-directional, but when there is a collab, even if it's not funded, if it's pro bono. And of course, this helps the research teams to articulate and make visible their impact. But we cannot use it to compare either individuals and actually also not teams, because they are doing so differently. It's more like a portfolio approach, where you have different people doing different things at different times. But then you can have that conversation with your manager or your dean. So some measurement, but it's not the entire answer.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that, so we started a few minutes late. We're only a few minutes behind schedule, but we want to have time to cover the last topic, which is maybe for some the most meaty one, which is, well, evaluation and impact, and Paul Adam is going to lead on that. So questions that we have received: is there a clear consensus of what impact is and how it should be measured? We have talked about this, so we can skip that one. Are narratives, impact case studies really the best way to demonstrate impact? And most impact indicators boil down to counting something. What qualitative indicators are there? Is there any standardized list of impact indicators that can be readily used? So this has been all touched upon, but I think we can package it now.
Yeah, I think we already gave some glances of what would be the answers, but in general, just please don't expect a straight answer to these questions. I think impact is about complexity, measuring complexity, and as you all know, one thing can be very complicated to do, but there is a solution, there is a measure, but when things are complex, it's different. And so what is a consensus on the definition of impact? We already said that of course the measurement of impact has to be fit for purpose, so it is really linked to what is the purpose of your assessment. So there is no consensus on a definition, but yes, there is a consensus on the fact that we are dealing about theory of change, we are dealing about effects, and how outcomes can be influential into the real world. I may stress, many of you have been in the course of 𝗬𝗏𝗿𝗏, so you already know, but in terms of measures and definitions and methods, there is no one size fits all. So there is no this method that will solve all your needs, assessment needs, because assessing impact can be drawn from many different perspectives at different assessment units. You can assess departments of universities, you can assess research centers, you can assess researchers' careers, you can assess disciplines, etc. And depending on what is the purpose and the unit you are willing to assess, you will need fit for purpose. So it's no one size fits all, and it's fit for purpose. And I'm quoting here Catherine Graham from Calgary University and Anne-Marie Dowd from the Australian Scientific Council. They keep repeating this in all the manuals that they are doing on methodology. Don't expect one solution. So you really need, at any time you want to measure impact, you really need to understand first what are the impact levels or the impact, the definitions of the impacts you are really interested, and then why you want to measure this. And this is really important because using the wrong method for a specific purpose may have side effects that may not be what you are looking for. And I'm going to be very explicit in, you already know the 6 A's on the purposes of research impact. One is analysis. So assessing research for a learning purpose, for understanding how science is working and how to shape it better for this ultimate goal, the mission of your center, etc. But there are other purposes. So, for example, if you are wanting to do an accountability exercise, there you need a representation and a multiplication of assessments in different levels, which is very different than emerging or illustrating good examples that can be shown to society, that can be shown to your advisory boards, etc. So there are also other purposes, like it could be I said advocacy, we could say the analysis, allocation, which is not the case of the CERCA assessment exercise, but it is the case of the REF, and this is why in the case of REF has been so controversial. Now, is the narratives the best way to assess impact, to measure impact? Well, again, it depends on what is your purpose. And well, again, it depends on whether you are seeking for a claiming or visualizing examples, or whether you are seeking for a transformation during the assessment process in itself. I do believe that the CERCA assessment process at current stage has had a lot of transformative effects in the centers, in the sense that there has been a learning process during this more than 1 year now, or even 4 years of that we are going to this process. At the same time, a lot of learning, understanding, a lot of learning for the centers itself, but also in the community of practice. So it is important not only the results of your assessment exercise, but the process of the assessment exercise. Now, is it the only way? I'm not going to list the alternative ways, but yes, I'm going to say that impact narratives are probably very convenient, because alternative ways of measuring can be very time-consuming and very costly, and they take very long time. For example, calculating cost-benefits analysis or cost-effectiveness analysis. I shall just put explain here one example of different ways to assessing impact, which is just one study that it's called UK Cancer Research, What It's Worth, by Jonathan Grant and other researchers from the UK. They wanted to measure the internal rate of return, so of investing as a country, UK, in cancer research, and what it has this return in monetary terms. So that meant a very long exercise with plenty of assumptions. But among those assumptions, there were midway studies, like, for example, they had to identify with consensus what were the most important treatments that or innovations in the country, and to what extent this was attributed to authors from the UK, but also calculating the QALYs and the quality adjusted life years. So how many quality adjusted life years have added this new innovation, and how to monetize this. This is extremely complex. You can do this once in a lifetime. It was useful to know that the internal rate of return was 30%. But once you know this is already enough to understand for the policymakers that it was a good investment to invest in cancer research. Now, if you want to do an accountability exercise and know from all the CERCA centers, yes, narratives can be very useful. But again, narratives at the end of the day, they are using a triangulation of methods. They are combining quantitative, qualitative data, but also the expert judgment, which is now being undergoing during this week. So again, a narrative is not just one measure. It's a combination of measures. In terms of indicators, batteries of indicators. Again, I don't think there is a set of indicators that is, here is the solution for what you're looking for. It depends on the purpose, and so it's a fit for purpose. I can list a number of indicators that are being available in different areas. The Enlight portal has a collection of tools, but also indicators that can be consulted, but there are many others. In biomedicine, the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences arrived to a consensus of a conceptual framework with 6 indicators that were very useful as a starting point, and that has been developed further in many different ways. So this is a starting point where you can look for a number of indicators. But again, there is no one place where you can go and get the solution to your indicators question. And so there is no standardized list of impact indicators ready to use. I think you will agree with me. And again, so let me just finish saying that whether it's a narrative, impact narrative, or another methodology, you need a combination of expert judgment, quantitative and qualitative, because we are dealing with complexity. We are dealing with engagement with outside of the control zone. So we are dealing with a mix of data, mix of sources, mix of testimonials, and mix of any other type of measurement. I don't know if you...
Thanks, Paula. Yeah. Does anyone want to take this on?
No stories without numbers and no numbers without stories. That's the qualitative, the quantitative indicators. If you choose to write a narrative, just again from the work that Jonathan Grant did, analyzing the almost 7,000 research excellence framework impact case studies from the 2021 REF exercise. Of almost 7,000 impact case studies, there were about 6,300 pathways to impact. Y'all are going to go, what? 7,000 case studies, 6,300 pathways to impact. That means there's 6,300 different indicators of impact in those 7,000 case studies. And so there's no, unfortunately, there is no indicator. Sorry, we cannot give that to you today. But because it is a complex, you use a complex system, right? So, but the best, I'm not going to say the best. One way to think about evaluating the impact is what was the plan you started with? Because if you're planning your impact at the beginning in your grant application, you should have already set up the indicators that you're wanting to measure. And they're indicators that are specific to your research project. So by planning your evaluation at the beginning, that means you're planning your impact strategy, you're doing what Paula will know is ex-ante impact assessment. And we don't really do that very well. So think about comparing your research or the research that you're supporting, and think about your impact assessment should link to your impact plan.
Yeah, I think I do agree a lot with that. But at the same time, that being said, I think we can also do some experiments, some more local experiments with trying to develop indicators where it makes sense. And trying to sort of develop the indicators in an intimate understanding of the area in which the research is working, and in that sense also respecting the complexity. Perhaps surprisingly to an afternoon seminar on impact, I would then encourage you to rather measure outcomes and not so much final impacts, because final impacts of scientific endeavors are extremely hard to measure. They are the subject of multiple externalities and multiple causal chains that are working to flesh out usable knowledge and make it work in society, and it's very, very difficult to isolate that to any sort of individual piece of research. So from a modeling perspective, that's going to cause you a lot of issues to trying to sort of get the entire chain of causal effects into your indicator. But if you're willing to look at outcomes, so those are sort of the immediate effects of the research you're conducting based on outputs and activities, and then looking at your intermediary effects on partner institutions. Then we have more workable frameworks available. For example, there is an entire research area called implementation science. And in implementation research, you work with templates and frameworks to measure the immediate outcome of an intervention in the target organization. So that could be patient care, it could be in psychiatric care, it could be in hospitals. And there you can basically download entire frameworks of indicators to understand, did the research make a meaningful impact? Do people work with your research after you left the experiment? Will there be resources allocated to keep that solution live after the project has closed? Will people be able to reconstruct the reasons why they introduced the interventions in the first place? So it's a whole dashboard of indicators, but it's not going to say anything about the accumulated long-time socioeconomic impacts on a global scale or on the economic scale of a society, but it will tell you something about whether or not your research is positioned in your complex networks. So again, it's sort of a both and or discussion, but there is sort of nuance to it.
Is there something?
Yeah, I'll keep it short. Yes, I agree with David, and that's what we do at Ghent. So we try to focus more on the process and evaluate the process rather than the impacts. And so we provide the research groups aimed at societal impact. We ask for their plan, and then we ask them what went well, what didn't go so well, where did you end up, and what are you putting in place as kind of a long-term sustainability of the relationships with the stakeholders and so on. So we're evaluating the process and the outcomes in between rather than the impacts. And then just to finish, next to 𝗂𝗏 and these kind of things, there's a very important statement, which is nothing about us without us. And that's what we do at our university as well. We develop our assessment framework together with the people and the institutes that we are going to assess. We involve them in drafting the framework. And we ask them, what type of indicators do you think are important? What type of narratives would you like to provide? How do you see your stakeholders have a role in this whole process? Do we need to invite them? Do we need to invite other types of experts? Not a complete co-creation of the framework, but we have them inform us about how they would like to be evaluated. And I think this is important as well, to make sure that there's an openness in that process. And we provide all the information that the panels get. We provide it to the people that will be evaluated as well, so they know that there's no hidden messages for the panel. We tell them everything, and we provide a lot of information. So I think that's important in the whole process as well.
Let me add one example, which is closer to you. In the Department of Health, in the Generalitat de Catalunya, there is a program, 𝗶𝘃𝗃, that funds research, health science research. And within this program, the department funds health professionals that take time out of their clinical activity to do research for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, with the final goal that after the period of this grant, they will go back to their clinical activities. How to assess a program like this? The dilemma was, what are we going to request to these researchers, and in that case was nursing in some of the cases, but they were also medical doctors. How to assess this? So what we did was actually do it together. So create together what are at the end of, so you're getting this money, which is money from the Department of Health. So it's health money to do research, but because we want at the end of at some point that this returns into health. So how do you think should be assessed? And so we created the indicators together. I think Nuria is here, she was part of this. But again, this is a fit for purpose. It's a little exercise, but it explains how it has to be contextualized. Yeah.
Okay, we're officially over time, but since we started a few minutes late, I think we can squeeze in a question if someone has one. So that. So we'll have 2 questions, okay? This one and the next one.
Hi everyone. Thank you for the enriching conversation, and thank you, CERCA, for organizing it for free. So I don't want to sound like reductionist, but from a humanistic point of view, the impact of impact, for me, it's like the metaphor of each of us seeing ourselves as bridges, as having the capacity of not being a bridge, but being the interpreter of all the people that are crossing the bridge. If I were to assess a young investigator or a young researcher, please think that what you do is important, because after the pandemic, no one is going solo. It doesn't lead us anywhere now. And hard skills are being replaced by soft skills, which is also important. So yeah, like the impact for me at least is like the capacity of seeing the bridge within ourselves.
Thank you.
Okay. So there was a final question here at the front. Yeah. Oh, sorry. There are two questions. Sorry, I didn't say. Yeah. So
there are three because I have two, but super quick.
Okay. Yeah. Just condense them into one.
Yeah, I'm gonna be quick. I would like to know what is the less intrusive way to measure impact within our institution, because I was doing the narrative for the CERCA, and wow, it was hard because I had to, do this narrative, and you mentioned many times, like, yeah, we have to involve the researchers and work with them. I try to work with them. I'm in the knowledge and technology transfer office, so I hope, yeah, and I had to do that, and they do not do documentation. They are, a nightmare when organizing themselves, so it's hard. So I don't know what's the less intrusive way to measure the impact of their technologies, if there is another one, like easiest. And the other one is that I'm working in the space sector. We are the Institute of Space Studies of Catalonia. And I know, because I am also an engineer, that what we do has a lot of impact. Yeah. And so my question here is, what's the best way to involve also the society within our strategy? Because many times when designing the strategy, we always focus on what's the best for society, for citizens. For example, Earth observation is always for citizens, for helping society. For example, natural hazards, as we have seen in the last weeks, and we can monitor that. And we showed many pictures from satellites to help to monitor these type of things. So how do I involve them? Because are they really interested in what we do? So that's my question. Because they don't know sometimes what we can do for them.
You said it was going to be quick.
Yeah, sorry.
The answer is not.
I have to
Tony,
explain.
I'm wondering if we should take both questions now and then see if we can wrap an answer into that.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. So,
great session. Thank you so much. Quick question: is impact a career path? And if it's a career path, what are the soft skills or hard skills you look out to hire an early researcher?
So, question is,
you have to tackle this separately.
Just very quickly, there is no easy way, there is no easy answer. We're at the beginning of a culture change in Catalonia, right? So, say we, you, are at the beginning of this culture change. And there, if we look back to about 2007 or 8, when the UK Research and Innovation, it wasn't called that then, introduced impact into the Research Excellence Framework, it was, the sky is falling, it's horrible, and now, how many years later? 15 years later, it's happening. So I would say be patient with yourself and with your institutions and with the CERCA as we figure it out. Not a full answer. Yes, a career path, look at us, right? So you've got an academic appointment. I do not. I'm professional staff. You're professional staff. So yeah, there's a career path here. Read my paper on skills, the competencies. But really, it's about relationships, about communication, and about being open. I would say those are the soft skills that really we practice a lot.
I think perhaps, again, trying to keep that brief, but in order to engage with your stakeholders, one good idea is to sort of ask them what they would like to see from you. And it's also sometimes important when you're formulating an impact strategy or even a research strategy to start thinking about, what would a problem look like from the perspective of our end user. So rather than looking at sort of the strategy only from the point of view of staff or CERCA or government, then think about, what does it mean for an everyday citizen like a taxi driver, bus driver to go to work and wanting to have a better weather forecast? Because that makes a difference to these people, that they have a reliable weather forecast. So there you could have like a citizen perspective saying we actually can program our research according to a citizen need. But it would take it of yourself to go talk to them, have stakeholder consultations, do participatory workshops, and then I would probably not formulate my entire research strategy based on that input, but I would, make a corner of the impact strategy dependent on stakeholder input. And it might take you in directions that you wouldn't have thought about in the first place, because the priorities of citizens might be quite different, as we heard today, than the priorities of scientists. But that's the whole point, productive interactions and finding productive tensions. So try to think, what would this problem look like from the perspective of someone outside academia?
I'm going to take another route than David's route. And what I have to say a lot to my researchers, also in research communication, is sometimes forget about that broader public, that broad audience, that citizen. That's the most difficult group. Maybe in space research, try and work with intermediaries for your stakeholders as well. So I don't know, in Flanders, we have these public astronomy clubs and groups of people that are very much into space. And I'm not very much into space, so I'm sorry for this answer, but you do have organizations that already act as an intermediary, as a group for your biggest stakeholder group. Interact with them first, because that's easier. It's maybe only 3 people to talk to, and they can act as kind of the spokesperson for a larger unit before you send your researchers out into the street asking everyone. So try and look at it from a strategic and efficient point of view as well. You have to manage it all, and so be clever about it. Yeah, not that his way is not clever, but sometimes it's the same for research communication. You don't need, as an institute, to do all the communication work yourself. Try and find a partner that already has an interest in that stakeholder group and has a platform to communicate. If you're working on AIDS, there's probably patient groups. There's these sexual health professionals that have an organization within your region. Talk to them, have them use your research, put it out there, and act as an intermediary to get feedback from bigger citizen groups.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think that with this, we have a slide for this. So, it's been a very interesting conversation. I think it's a lot of food for thought for everyone. Thank you all for coming, and especially thanks to our 4 panelists for their very interesting remarks and comments. So that's it, thanks.